Hello, athletics enthusiasts. Welcome back to Tracks in the Sand. This week, we are exploring all things athletics, and we're lucky enough to have with us Oceania Athletics Life member Bob Snow with us this week to talk about all things distance running in the Pacific, with a bit of a lead up to the World Cross Country Championships going to be held in Australia, in Oceania, for the second ever time. Bob, firstly, thanks for coming on, and do you want to just tell us a bit of a background of a brief background of how you got involved in athletics, and especially within the Pacific?
Well, first of all, I'd like to send out a big hello to all of my friends around the Pacific and in Australia and New Zealand, but mainly the Pacific. I, first of all, became fascinated by athletics with the 1956 Olympic Games. But it took until I went to Fiji as a school teacher in the 1970s for me to become involved with the sport there. And in 1975, 76 and 77, I was involved with athletics in Fiji. I went to Zimbabwe for a while, but when I returned to the Pacific and to Papua New Guinea, from 84 until the present day, I've had involvement with athletics in Papua New Guinea. I spent 1 year also in Vanuatu in 1998 and was marginally involved there, but I've seen 14 Pacific Games. I've lost count of the Oceania-sponsored athletics championships, Grand Prix, Oceania Cups, and all the other meets that they have held since 1990. I've loved the sport and I'm looking forward to us coming back to normal.
Indeed, Bob, I can't wait for that too. First of all, I'll touch on the shirt. So my shirt's from the 2018 Polynesian Championships. And Bob, you are wearing the colours of Papua New Guinea. You mentioned them before. The jacket comes from where?
It's it was the team tracksuit top from the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta. I was very fortunate to be asked to be the team manager for athletics. We had 7 athletes. Some people might remember people like Peter Pulu and Ivan Wakit, Samuel Bai, and our coach was Naomi Pollum. It was a great memory, and I'm proud to wear this still. I'm now an honorary life member of Athletics Papua New Guinea, as well as Oceania Athletics.
Wow. So today we're going to be talking all things distance running in the Pacific. First of all, just a question about who have been some significant figures, and there's been a few in long distance running throughout the Pacific. You can touch on some of the more significant figures, more significant runners in the Pacific.
Yes. To begin with, I'd like to just set the scene. When the first South Pacific Games came along in 1963, there were no distance races for women. So for the women, I'll deal with that later. They really didn't get into the competition until a lot later. But to begin with, most of the sport in different parts of the Pacific were being controlled by colonial officials, and many of them came from good cross-country, long-distance running backgrounds. But what was interesting is that a lot of them were eligible to represent their countries in the early games. So you get somebody like Mike Joyce, an expatriate, won 2 gold medals for Papua New Guinea in the early games. Nauru had a gold medal winner, Robbie Morgan Morris, in the 5,000 and 10,000 metres. But it was really with the 70s that things started to come alive. It started, first of all, with Fiji's Usaya Sotutu. He was a great runner who got a scholarship to go to Brigham Young University in Salt Lake City in Utah, and there his career just took off. In 1972, he got the South Pacific record for the 3,000-metre steeplechase of 8 minutes, 48 seconds. It's been out of reach since then. He was the first of the Pacific Islanders to really stamp his stamp his authority on the Pacific Island long-distance races. Shortly after, there was John Kokenai from Papua New Guinea. He had a short career, but he was also dominant. And it was interesting that a famous Australian athlete, Albie Thomas, travelled to Rabaul in Papua New Guinea in 1972 to pace set for the 1,500-metre national record and the 5,000-metre national record with John Kokenai. And John Kokenai was the star of the 1975 Games in Guam. And it's interesting that another Australian, Jack Pross, was the coach of the Australian team at that stage. And it was in Guam that 3 athletes came together in the 10,000 metres, and they were to dominate the 70s. The other one that I'm about to mention dominated Pacific Island long-distance running until he retired in 1991, and that's Alain Lazare from New Caledonia. Alain Lazare, his best ever over the marathon was 2 hours, 11:59 seconds, but he did run a marathon on a slightly downhill course of 2 hours, 8 minutes and 47 seconds. In the course of his career, he ran under 2 hours, 20 minutes, 27 times for the marathon. He also had wins over more than 30 over marathon and half marathon distances. His last marathon was 1989, and it was a win in Sydney on Anzac Day. He won the Anzac Day Sydney Marathon. But at the Pacific Games, he won 24 gold medals. The highlight for him would have been 1987, when he won the 800, 1,500, 3,000 steeplechase, 5,000, 10,000 and marathon.
Wow, what a week.
He still holds so many Pacific records. It's unbelievable. And he was not an expatriate. He was born in New Caledonia, but obviously represented France on many, many occasions. The 70s was the highlight. After he left, the long-distance running would have been dominated by Georges Richemont from from French Polynesia. He started running when he was stationed on Mururoa Atoll, a very infamous part of the Pacific, in 1983. And then when he came to the track, he won 16 gold medals in Pacific Island competition. He was dominant for a long time. After him, most of the other champions were there for maybe 2 games, but none of them had the longevity of Alain Lazare or Georges Richemont. And today we've got a fantastic group of distance runners, but their times are not nearly as good as those from the 70s and 80s. And we hope that we can kickstart it all again to try and get some really good times in the future.
I hope so. I think you definitely mentioned we've got a good crop of young Pacific Island distance runners, and we'll touch on, and you briefly touched on when you started the involvement of female distance running to now, the involvement now. We got results through from the Palau half marathon and marathon, and they had nearly double the amount of female competitors to male competitors over the last weekend. Fantastic achievement. Can you maybe touch on the effect of the introduction of female distance running in the Pacific and where that's come from to where it is now?
It's come from the countries that had a strong colonial or territorial presence. We look at the French, we look at the Americans, we look at the Australians, where they had, the British, where they had colonies, they introduced it. But today, it's the French and the Americans that are keeping things really going. The traditions that have come from North America and also from Europe, where we see proper preparation for long distance running. The cross-country season, followed by road running, or then road running, then the cross country, and then the track and field season. So Palau, it will be really good because traditionally the distance running in Micronesia has been centered on Guam, and they've had a great tradition going back a very long time.
Yes.
But early on with the for the Pacific Islands, there were no long distance races for women. They didn't introduce the 1,500 meters until the 80s. Then they had the 3,000 meters, but the 3,000 meters didn't give way to the 5,000 until 1999. But when we look at the Pacific Island athletes, we've got to go back to just a few of them who have made a real name over the years. Number one has got to be Nadia Bernard-Prasad. She was born in France, but she moved as a 6-year-old to New Caledonia. And as a 15-year-old, she moved from swimming to athletics and had immediate success. She was a fantastic runner who broke many records and established many that are still standing today. But it was as a marathon runner that she really made her name. But she'd left New Caledonia by then. She was a full-time professional athlete living in the United States of America with her Fiji husband, Binesh Prasad. There she won the Las Vegas Marathon. She was 7th in the Chicago Marathon. Boston Marathon. She came 3rd in the New York City Marathon. And in 1995, just prior to coming to the Pacific Games in Tahiti, she won the Los Angeles Marathon in a time of 2 hours, 28 minutes. Again, a time that no Pacific Island athletes had been anywhere near. The other ones, Rosemary Turari Omanston from Papua New Guinea, Salome Tambuatale from Fiji, and more recently Sharon Firasua from the Solomon Islands. They're the ones who've carried the mantle, and on the road, Sophie Gardon, who just keeps on keeping on. Sophie Gardon was a wonderful asset to French Polynesia for many years, and she won many medals for them, but she never, ever participated in the mini games, only the full games.
Well, so you talked briefly about the height of distance running, probably in the 80s throughout the Pacific. In terms of when you started to get involved and you were involved and know a lot about a lot of things about the Pacific, was there races in the Pacific outside of the Pacific Games and area championships? Were there road races around for these athletes to go and compete in?
Well, before the internet, it was difficult for me to keep in contact with what was happening elsewhere. But there were definitely cross-country races in a wide variety of countries, including the Cook Islands. I think I saw one even in Niue. But of course, French Polynesia, New Caledonia, and Papua New Guinea had regular races. I know we had the Port Moresby Marathon and half marathon every year. In Goroka, we had the Mile High Marathon. We had half marathons there. A lot of cross-country championships around the country. And once the 90s came, not a lot of road running outside of the French countries and also the American. That's a given. In the American territories and the French possessions, that has been a mainstay for a very, very long time.
Yeah. You talk about cross-country and we're on the top of the show, the opener, I mentioned the World Cross Country being in Oceania for the second time. A lot of our federations have been to World Cross Country Championships.
Yes.
You briefly explain who and maybe some of the teams that have been, and what a fantastic opportunity to have the World Championships in our area?
I think it was in the early 90s, Guam sent a junior team to the World Cross Country Championships. And then for 4 cross country championships in a row, Fiji sent teams. In 1999, 97 and 98, Papua New Guinea sent a team. The one in 98 went to the World Cross Country Championships. They then went to the World Road Relays in Manaus in Brazil, and they competed on every continent that year on that tour except Antarctica. So Tony Green took them on a magical mystery tour, and that was very, very important for them. But it's not been very strong ever since. And when I look at Pacific participation in World Cross Country recently, it's only been Avikash Lal from Fiji in 2015 in China and 2017 in Kampala in Uganda who has participated to my knowledge. Yeah. But I do know that PNG is starting to prepare a team for Bathurst next year, and I really would like to see all of the different countries in the Pacific who are eligible to prepare teams for that. When it was held in New Zealand, only 2 teams participated, and they didn't take the opportunity of being so close. Fiji sent a men's and women's team, and that was excellent, but PNG didn't. I think with it being so close, or just a flight to Sydney and then a trip up to Bathurst, it would be wonderful for them to start building the base for their distance runners for the year that follows, because there's a lot of important events coming up next year. We hope that they will all go ahead as scheduled.
You talked about Avikash Lal being the only Pacific Islander to be in the World Cross Country in the last few years, and you've talked about maybe the height of distance running in that late 80s, 90s period. You got thoughts on maybe why there's been a slow decline outside of, say, the French federations and the American federations in terms of distance running in the Pacific?
Yes, I've given it a bit of thought. In many of the countries, the heroes today are the sprinters, the explosive event people. You know, the people who can quite easily transition to rugby sevens, rugby 15, rugby league, to a lesser extent soccer. So we see the sprinters now are the pin-up people of the current era, and that has led to a lot of people dropping off with their interest in the long distance running. Also, I think once the marathon was deleted from the Pacific Games, a lot of people didn't prepare for the long distance races. And if you look at the half marathon times, they're not great. And many of the teams will select somebody for the 5,000 or 10,000 and say, oh, you can also go on the half marathon, but they haven't specifically prepared for it. And I think we've seen some fairly disappointing results in recent years because of that. It's very difficult to train in the tropics with the hot, humid conditions, and this could also be an additional factor. But getting back to the women, my disappointment is that as far as the women athletes are concerned, the real strength has been the mature women who stay in the sport beyond school. Many of them have reached their peak after they've given birth to children. We look at them, they are still strong at 30. You know, Salome Tambua-Tale did not come to athletics until she was nearly 30. She was an aerobics champion. And after spending many years in the sport, she then went to VAR, the canoe racing. At the age of 59, she had her last Pacific Games in 2019. Fit, still fit. And a very, very fine example to anybody that would like to take her as an example. She stayed with sport, 3 different sports. She excelled in athletics, and she still holds national records in Fiji, and a wonderful person. Rosemary Turari also stayed with it for a very long time. Nadia Prasad stayed with it for a long time. Sophie Gardon, maybe she's still running. Yeah, but we have too many baby athletes coming into the sport. They're brilliant for one games, and then they disappear. I'll never forget the 2009 mini games in the Cook Islands, where the hero was a little girl called Betty Babalu, and the crowd went crazy. They were talking about her years later. We never saw her again. PNG's had a whole string of what I will call baby athletes. Fiji has had baby athletes. Probably the most famous race involving the young athletes was in 2007 in Samoa in the South Pacific Games. And we had a 40-year-old, Sophie Gardon, against two 14-year-olds, Akesa Nrotini and also Porogahakabe from Papua New Guinea. It was won by Akesa Nrotini. Second was Sophie Gardon, and third was Porogahakabe. Sophie's still running, Poro's still running, but sadly, Akesa, who looked to have the world at her feet, did not continue. And this is a problem right around the Pacific. Very, very few of the female athletes continue once they leave school.
Thanks, Bob. I might ask you just as a final question, just maybe a bit of advice for the young distance runners out there watching, and just a bit of advice for them, sort of what you think that they should be doing and continue to try and do, maybe in the short term for the World Cross Country, but looking longer term to the mini games, the area champs, the Pacific Games in 2023 in the Solomon Islands.
Well, as a statistician now and occasional commentator, I've left my coaching behind. But I think the important thing is just to stick at it, regular training, listen to your coaches, and if possible, persuade your federations to put on appropriate races for you to participate. So there's a logical pathway from the 800 meters. You might start at that and then you're up to 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, who knows? But it's really important. But I'd like to jump back to one thing I've forgotten, and that was the 800. We didn't talk much about middle distance, but there have been some phenomenal middle distance runners in the Pacific. And we're not quite as good at the minute, but the ones I'd like to particularly mention were Rick Kermode from Fiji. He was born in Fiji, but really he's a New Zealander now. He did 3 minutes 42 seconds for the 1,500 meters. Then there was Israeli Nakalakalavesi. Then Clement Abai from Papua New Guinea. Then there was Anase Kurin. These are the ones who've been sub 1 minute 50 seconds. Adrian Keller from New Caledonia also joined them. So it's good to start out. A lot of the good distance runners were 800-meter runners to begin with. Start increasing your distance to see what event really is your best one, the one where you are going to make so much of an impression later on. You don't know at the beginning of your career. Give it a go, try the longer distance races, and if you've got good speed, that will stand you in good stead at the end.
It definitely will be. It definitely will, Bob, and thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate your knowledge, your wisdom, your a wealth of knowledge on all things Pacific athletics, and I'm sure this won't be the only time we get you on Tracks in the Sand, so we look forward to having you on again, and we'd love to have you on again. So thanks again, Bob, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for asking me to be part of this really great initiative. Well done. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thanks everyone for watching this episode, and we look forward to having you join us next time on Tracks in the Sand.